Hello, my name is Aviva, and today I have some romance recommendations for you. So for a while now, I've been doing these romance trope recommendation videos where I take a specific trope and then I give you a bunch of recs that fall into it. I've done like Grumpy Sunshine, Fake Dating, It's Always Been You, Enemies to Lovers. I've done so many classics already, and if you're not caught up with all of these videos and you want to check them out, I'll make sure that the playlist for them is linked down below. But basically, you guys have seemed to very much enjoy those videos, so from now on, every single Friday, I'm going to be putting out another trope recommendation video. So today I'm doing billionaire men romances. It's super simple. It's just when the main guy that we're following is very wealthy and it somehow drives the story. And a great example for this is the first book that I'm going to share with you, which is Broken French by Tasha Boyd. So this is about a billionaire dad. He's a single dad, and basically he lives in France and he's about to go on vacation on his very big, very fancy yacht for the summer with his little kid. So he needs a nanny to come with him because he's going to be working a lot. So basically the girl just quit her job. She was an architect, and for whatever reason, she decides to take this nannying position because she's not sure what she wants to do with herself right now. So she ends up going to the south of France and starts nannying for this little girl, and she ends up hanging out with the single dad a lot, and obviously a romance will slowly bloom between the two of them. So the fact that this guy is a super billionaire very much drives the story because it gives the atmosphere for it. Like, he's always working, and then his work somehow comes into the story at some points, and then they're also in the south of France eating this very fancy food on his very fancy yacht, and it gives off a vibe. And if you're into billionaire men and you're down for a slow burn, then I definitely recommend this one. Next, I have The Stopover by T.L. Swan. So this is the first book that I read by this author, but I do know that in general, she tends to write this sort of vibe, like billionaire men. So if you're a fan of this trope, I bet that you could find a lot of books by her that you'll probably enjoy, but I've only read this one so far, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's basically about these two people who meet on a flight and end up having a one-night stand when their flight takes an unexpected stopover for the night, and they have a great time together, but they don't exchange numbers, don't really ever see each other again. And then it's a year later and this girl gets a new job at this company that she's been wanting to work at for a while. And who do you know is the CEO of the company? This guy that she had a one-night stand with a year ago. So the story kind of takes off from there once they realize who each other are, sort of vibes, and it was a ton of fun. So he's the CEO of one of the biggest news companies in the world, and it definitely has that vibe. He has a beautiful apartment, he has really nice clothing, he's very good looking, very arrogant, all the sort of vibes that you're looking for when you're looking for a rich guy in a book. This guy has it. Next, I have the Addicted/Calloway Sisters series by Kristen Becker-Ritchie. So I've spoken about this series way too much on my channel recently, so I'm not going to go into heavy detail. But if you are curious about this series and you want to know more about it, then I recommend checking out the video that I'll have linked down below of how to read this series, what it's about, and everything that you might have questions about. It is a collection of 10 books, and you're following 6 characters and 3 different couples. And happens to be all 6 of these characters are extremely wealthy. Their parents own very big companies like Johnson & Johnson and Pepsi and Coke sort of vibe, big companies. And the story is definitely driven in the sense of they're all wealthy and therefore they're living a very specific life. And if you are down for that and you're willing to commit to this series, I'm telling you, you are not going to be disappointed. Next, I wanted to talk about the Off-Campus series by Elle Kennedy and also the Briar U series, which is the spin-off of it. So it's a collection of 4 books, and then Briar U is also a collection of 4 books, and you get a romance in each book. They're all standalones, but they interconnect sort of vibes, and they're all college hockey sports romances. The guy is always on the hockey team and they end up having a romance. So not all of these books are, the billionaire vibe, but specifically book 1 and book 3 in the Off-Campus series does have the wealthy vibe going on because the main guys, have a lot of money, and therefore it drives the story in a certain way. They're kind of privileged and they're very good looking, and everything that comes with that sort of territory you get in some of the books in this series. So I did want to mention it because if you like rich men, then you will find some of them in this series and its spin-off series. Next, I have Enemies by Tijan, which is a college sports romance. So the girl's in college and she's gonna end up having a romance with this pro football player who she knew growing up, and they used to be best friends, and then once puberty hit, they kind of started to hate each other, and now they're enemies. But now that she's in college out of state and he happens to be a pro football player in the same state, their parents are kind of like, get to know each other again. Here are each other's numbers. You know nobody where you're living besides for each other, so go and talk. And they're all like, no, I don't want to talk to her. I don't want to talk to him. And then something happens to happen in this girl's life and nobody could get a hold of her. So this guy kind of takes it upon himself to go and track her down and tell her the news. And then the story is kind of going to take off from there. So he is a pro football player and therefore he is very wealthy and he lives in a really beautiful home and he's just got that vibe going on. So if you are down for that, then I highly recommend this book because I absolutely loved it. Next, I actually have 3 books by the same author, which is V. Keeland, and one happens to be by Penelope Ward also. But basically, all 3 of these books are really similar, so I'm just jumbling them up together. I have Boss Man, Stuck Up Suit, and then Egomaniac. And all 3 of these books are basically following this guy who is very arrogant, very good looking, always in a nice suit, and owns his own company. And a girl is going to come into his life, and they're going to have a romance. They're all in like a workplace environment sort of thing, and because of that you basically always get to see how he is like the owner of the company. He's really wealthy, everybody's always looking up to him and maybe are sometimes scared of him sort of vibes. And basically if you're down for just that classic billionaire romance sort of vibes where the guy just has a lot of money and flaunts it and you're just living in that sort of world, then I highly recommend checking all 3 of these out. And just in case you were curious, Boss Man is my favorite of the 3. And then while we're on the topic of talking about a bunch of books by the same author, I wanted to mention 3 books by Mariana Zapata, which is Culty, The Wall of Winnipeg and Me, and then From Look Up With Love. So these are all sports romances. Culty is a soccer romance. The Wall of Winnipeg and Me is a football romance, and From Look Up With Love is a ice skating romance. And in all 3 of these books, the main guy is a pro sports player, like in their specific field. So in Culty, he basically becomes the main girl's coach. Like she is a pro soccer player as well, and he comes and starts coaching her, and then a romance is going to happen. And in The Wall of Winnipeg, she is basically his assistant, and the story kind of like takes off on a whole turn, but it starts out where she is his assistant and he is a grumpy football player. And then in From Look Up With Love, it's basically about these 2 pro skaters who end up getting paired together and they never really got along, and now they actually have to work together and get in sync with each other. And basically in all 3 of these books, the guy is very wealthy and it definitely shows. So if you're down for a slow burn romance and you like when the guy is really rich, has a nice house, all of that sort of vibes, then I recommend checking these 3 out. Next, I have The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren, which is about this guy who started this company where they'll take your DNA and they'll find your soulmate through it. Like it's a matchmaking company, but like scientifically or whatever. And basically this girl ends up giving in her DNA to this company and ends up getting a 98% match with the boss of the company. And the thing is that this company is about to go public and they've never gotten a match that was so close to 100%. So they really want to like publicize it sort of vibes. The only issue is that this girl knows the owner of the company and they don't get along, and they're like, your science is totally off. But the thing is that the company really wants to show this off, so they end up paying her to fake date him so that they could publicize it, and at the same time they'll see if maybe they actually could get along. So you're kind of following a fake dating story between this very wealthy guy who owned this science-y matchmaking company and then this girl who kind of really needed the money because she's like a single mom. So that's why she like decided to do it, because like she couldn't pass up on the offer sort of vibes. And then they're gonna have a romance and obviously they'll fall for each other by the end of the book. So this was really cute. And again, he owns his own company and he's very good looking. He's a little bit famous, sort of like a bachelor sort of vibes. And you know, it has those billionaire vibes to it. Next, I have The Club Trilogy by Lauren Rowe, which is probably one of the steamiest books from this stack. It's one of the steamiest books that I read in 2021, but also it's probably one of the richest guys from this stack. It's basically about this guy who basically likes having sex, but doesn't like having the emotional commitment to a girl and doesn't want to feel bad about it. So he basically signs up for this sex club where they're basically going to find you your perfect match. Like it's kind of a matchmaking club, but like you get to tell them your specifically what you're looking for in the sexual department, and they're gonna find you somebody who's down for that. So he fills out this whole application and he's very brutally honest with what he's looking for, and he sends it in, and the girl that works for this company that deals with the application process reads what he says and is like, oh my God, he is such an arrogant jerk. So she ends up sending him a private email basically bashing him for what he said, and then he's really turned on by what she said in her email, and he ends up tracking her down, and then they end up having a romance. So he is extremely wealthy, and it definitely shows in this book. Like, he's an owner of a company, and like he's very good looking, and you know, he's always like wearing the perfect outfit, and he has money to spend. He's just throwing money left and right sort of vibes. And if you are down for everything I just mentioned, then I highly recommend checking this series out. Next, I have the Ravenhood series by Kate Stewart. So this is actually like a really rich girl and a really rich guy. So this series is not for everybody. It is a romantic suspense, so there's a lot of mystery surrounding it. The whole time you're reading it, you're not really going to know what's going on until the end of the third book. Like, you're always questioning things because the main girl is always questioning things. Like, even she doesn't know what's going on. It's basically about this girl who, her father owns this Fortune 500 company, and to get her inheritance, she has to go and work for him for a year. So she ends up moving to the town that her father lives in. She moves into his mansion, and on the first day of working at his factory, she basically meets this guy and ends up going home with him because he's having a party at his house, and she ends up like meeting everybody that, you know, is part of his crew, and she ends up like getting sucked into his world. Like, he's kind of part of like a club of sorts, and you don't really know like all these people that he's hanging out with. He's also like, you know, working at a mechanic shop, and he's kind of like the bad boy of the town, and it kind of has that vibe going on. Like, everybody's like, stay away from them, they're bad news, and obviously she doesn't stay away from them. And throughout all three of these books, she has a couple of romances, and one of the guys is extremely wealthy. So that's all I'm gonna say. I don't really want to give away anything other than that because you're kind of supposed to be left in the dark when you read this series. Like, you should just go in blind, and if you end up enjoying like the first half of the first book, you're gonna love the rest of the series. If you're not vibing with it like halfway through, then it's probably not for you. But this series definitely was for me, and I absolutely loved it. And if you are down for the rich vibes, then you definitely will find it in this series. Next, I have the Maid series by Danielle Laurie. So this is a Mafia romance companion series. I'm holding up book 1, which is The Sweetest Oblivion, and I probably should have grabbed book 3 because it also fits into this category, but it is The Darkest Temptation. Book 1 is basically an arranged marriage, and then book 3 is a kidnapping romance. And in both of those books specifically, the main guy is very wealthy, and it definitely shows in the book. And, you know, they're part of the mafia and things happen. So I definitely recommend checking up trigger warnings if you decide to read this book. But there are 3 books in the series, and the middle book doesn't necessarily have this trope, but it's still a pretty solid read. So in general, I'm recommending this series because it was one of my favorites from the year, but specifically book 1 and book 3 does have that very rich man vibe going on. And then on a very similar note, I wanted to quickly mention the Brutal Birthright series by Sophie Lark. So if you're a fan of the Maid series, you'll definitely be a fan of the Brutal Birthright series because they're extremely similar. This is also a Mafia romance companion series, but it's a little like tamer. It's a little bit more like normal vibes, but it's definitely surrounding the Mafia. So again, check trigger warnings. But basically in book 1, you are following an arranged marriage. And I feel like in all of the books in this series, it kind of generally has that vibe, but I feel like specifically in book 1 and book 2, you get the rich vibe the most. Book 1 is arranged marriage, book 2 is a kidnapping romance. And in the first 2 books, you definitely feel the fact that the guy is very wealthy, part of the mafia. But in general, the mafia, they've got a lot of money going on. So there is money, you know, throughout all of these books. But specifically, I feel like in book 1 and book 2, you get the vibes the most. And then also by Sophie Lark, I have the Sinners duet, which is There Are No Saints and then There Is No Devil. And this is a serial killer romance. You're following this guy who's a serial killer, but he's also a very famous artist. And because of that, he is extremely wealthy. And this book is definitely dark and twisted and very different than anything I've ever read before, but I highly recommend it. And if you are down for a very wealthy man who definitely shows off his money and is living that sort of life, and you're down for some really dark and twisted stuff, then I recommend this series. Next, I wanted to recommend the Sinner of Saints series by LJ Shen. So these are all companion books. You get your own romance in each story, but they all interconnect. I'm holding up book 1, which is Vicious. This is a bully romance. Book 2 is Ruckus, which is a second chance romance. Book 3 is Scandalous, and that is an age gap forbidden romance. And then book 4 is just a different world. It's called Bane, and I'm not gonna get into it, but I highly recommend it. But check the trigger warnings before you read it because there are a lot of them in there. But basically, in this series, you are following 4 different guys that are all best friends. They grew up with each other, they went to the same high school, and basically when they got older, they started a company together, and they now have like a building in different like cities. Like one is in New York, one's in Chicago, one's in London, and one's in California, and they all like change buildings. Like all of them, like they head one building, but then they're slowly like moving, and every couple of months they go and they check out the other building, and then they swap places sort of vibes. They're all very close, and basically they all work together. I over-explained that for absolutely no reason, but basically all of these guys are extremely wealthy. They own their own company, and basically they all get their own romance one way or another. And I love this series. It was one of my favorites from last year. I've talked about it so much in so many videos lately, so obviously I highly recommend it. But if you are definitely looking for that billionaire vibe going on, then all of these books definitely have that. And the last book I'm going to share with you is Make Me Bad by R.S. Grace. So this is a cute rom-com that takes place in a small town. You're following like a good girl, bad boy sort of vibe. The girl is like the daughter of the sheriff of the town, and she works at a library, and she's just like a goody two-shoes. Nobody was ever able to get close to her because her father's the sheriff, and everybody's like scared to, ever date her or anything like that. So she's kind of a prude. And basically this guy is very wealthy. He owns like half the town. He's very good looking. He's somewhat of a player. And for some reason, they end up crossing paths, and he's actually going to start and working at the library with her because he has to do some community service. And basically, once they start to get closer, she basically asks him to like make her bad. She's like, look, I'm a prude, and you know how to do bad things because you're a player and you have a name for yourself. So please show me the ropes. And he's like, sure, I will. And then, a romance is going to happen, and he's going to start to, like do some scandalous things with her sort of vibes. Like nothing crazy, like going skinny dipping and stuff like that. But it's basically a lot of fun, and he is definitely very wealthy, and he gives off those good looking, rich vibes. So if you are down for that sort of stuff, then I recommend checking this one out because this one was a ton of fun. But anyway, that is everything that I have to share with you. So I'm curious to know if you have any billionaire romance recommendations for me that I didn't mention in this video, because I'm always looking for some good recommendations. But also, if you wanted me to make another video like this with a trope that I haven't done before, feel free to leave me a comment down below, because if I have enough recommendations for the trope that you're asking for, I 100% will make a video for you. So leave me a comment down below, and if you enjoyed watching this video, then please give it a thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed to my channel, then please hit that subscribe button. And anyway, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy reading.